At exactly 1 a.m., my phone vibrated on the nightstand, and in that single moment, my entire marriage collapsed. Because the message on the screen read, "Do not wait for me tonight," followed immediately by a photo that felt like a knife pushed straight into my chest. My wife standing inches away from another man in a hotel mirror, her hand on his chest, her face glowing with a happiness I had not seen in years. And before my mind could even process the betrayal, my fingers moved on their own and typed back, "No one is waiting for you anymore, and if you want stories that force you to watch until the very last second, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment that you are staying till the end. Because this story does not slow down." 7 minutes later, I heard frantic knocking on the front door. The kind of knocking that comes from fear, not urgency. And when I opened it, she was standing there, breathless, eyes wide, mascara smudged, shaking like she had seen a ghost. Because the man in that photo had just abandoned her the moment he realized she was married, and now she was running back to the life she had casually destroyed. She stepped inside, expecting forgiveness, or at least silence, but what she saw stopped her cold. The living room was empty. No photos on the walls, no wedding frames, no shared memories. Every trace of her had been removed like she never existed. And that was when she understood something far more terrifying than anger. I was calm, and calm is what people become right before they do something permanent. I told her to sit down and listen carefully, because this was the last time she would hear my voice without consequences. I reminded her how I moved from Ohio to California for her career, how I invested my savings into her startup, how I defended her name when rumors first started circulating, and how every lie she told slowly trained me to prepare. Because while she thought she was getting away with cheating, I was building something far more dangerous than suspicion. I was building patience. I explained that the photo she sent was not a mistake, but a trigger. Because I had already copied every message, every email, every location ping from her phone to a private drive, including conversations with that same man planning this meeting weeks in advance. Her face turned pale as I placed my phone on the table and slid it toward her, showing her screenshots she did not know I had. And that was when I told her the truth that made her knees buckle. This was not the night I lost my wife. This was the night she lost everything. Because revenge does not begin with shouting or violence. It begins with strategy, and she had just walked straight into mine. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. Her lips moved like she was underwater, and I watched her the way a doctor watches a patient after delivering bad news, with distance and precision. Then I told her to look around again because she still had not noticed what really mattered. The filing cabinet near the window was open, the laptop on the table was not hers, and the quiet hum she heard was the external hard drive copying the final set of files. I explained calmly that for the past 6 months I had felt something shift in her behavior. The late meetings, the sudden passwords, the way she flinched when her phone buzzed, and instead of confronting her like a desperate husband, I chose to become an observer. I learned how her startup was funded. I learned which investors trusted her face but never read the contracts. And I learned that her entire company legally rested on assets I quietly transferred into a holding account under my name when she asked me to handle the finances because she said she trusted me more than herself. Her breaths started coming in short bursts as she finally understood that betrayal was not a single act but a series of choices, and choices have consequences. I told her that the man in the photo was not the first, just the most careless, and I had proof of 3 others, each one documented, time-stamped, and backed up. Not for jealousy, but for leverage. Because in America, the truth does not destroy you. The paper trail does. She dropped into the chair like her legs had given up, whispering my name as if it could save her. But names lose power when respect dies. I told her that by morning her board would receive an anonymous email containing evidence of misuse of funds, breach of contract, and personal conduct that violated every moral clause she signed without reading. I told her the investors would freeze accounts before she finished her first apology call, and the man she ran to tonight would block her number before sunrise. She started crying, then real tears, this time promising to fix everything, promising therapy, honesty, loyalty, but promises after exposure are just panic. Wearing a polite mask, I reminded her that when she sent that photo she made a choice to humiliate me, and humiliation does not fade, it hardens. I told her she had exactly 10 minutes to pack essentials and leave, because after tonight, this house would no longer be considered shared property. She asked where she would go, and I answered honestly, anywhere that is not here. because survival is not my responsibility anymore. As she stood up shaking, she looked back one last time and asked me why I was doing this, instead of just divorcing her quietly. And I gave her the truth she would carry forever, because divorce lets people pretend they made mistakes. This makes sure no one forgets what she did. She left the house just before dawn, carrying 2 suitcases that held only what she could grab in panic. And the moment the door closed behind her, I did not feel relief or sadness. I felt focus. The kind of cold clarity that comes when emotion finally steps aside and lets intention take control. I sat alone in the living room watching the city outside wake up. Cars passing like nothing had changed, while my life had shifted into a different reality entirely. And by 8:30 a.m., the first move was already in motion. Her phone started ringing nonstop, not from friends or family, but from numbers she recognized too well. Investors, partners, legal advisors, people whose trust she had built carefully and lost in a single night. I knew exactly what each call was about because I had written the email myself, with the precision of someone who understood how systems collapse. The subject line was simple and professional. No emotion, no accusations, just documentation. Attached files labeled clearly, bank transfers highlighted, messages printed, hotel receipts matched to calendar entries she had submitted as business travel. And most importantly, the clauses from her own contracts underlined in yellow, the ones that turned personal misconduct into corporate liability. By mid-morning, her company website went offline under the excuse of maintenance, but I knew better. Accounts had been frozen, access revoked, passwords reset, the illusion of control stripped away piece by piece. I imagined her sitting somewhere unfamiliar, refreshing her inbox, watching her world shrink with every unanswered message, and for the first time since the betrayal my chest felt light, not because I enjoyed her suffering, but because balance was returning. Around noon, I received a call from her attorney, his tone careful, neutral, trying to establish whether I intended to escalate, and I answered him with the same calm I had used all night. I told him I had already submitted everything necessary, and that my involvement was finished. Any further exposure would depend entirely on how quietly this was handled. Silence on my end had become a currency, one she could no longer afford to waste. The attorney thanked me in the way people do when they realize they are negotiating from the weaker side. And after the call ended, I took a drive through parts of the city we used to dream about together. The beach where she talked about expansion. The coffee shop where she signed her first deal. Places that once symbolized ambition now felt like closed chapters. By evening, her name was already circulating in industry circles. Not loudly, not publicly, but enough to stain reputations, enough to make future meetings uncomfortable. Trust fragile, opportunities conditional. She tried to call me then, over and over, leaving voicemails that shifted from anger to desperation to something close to regret. But regret after exposure is not reflection. It is fear of consequences. I did not answer, because answering would have given her the comfort of connection, and comfort was no longer something I owed. 2 days later, she showed up unannounced at my office building. Security called me to ask if I knew her, and that question alone told me everything. I watched her on the lobby camera, hair pulled back, clothes wrinkled, posture uncertain. The confident woman who once walked into boardrooms, now waiting for permission to be acknowledged. I told security she was not expected and asked them to escort her out respectfully. No drama, no scene, just removal, because exclusion is louder than rejection. That night, I finalized the last legal steps, separating assets completely, transferring ownerships that had quietly been in my control for months. The house, the accounts, the investments she assumed were shared but never verified, all of it locked down, documented, cleaned. The law rewards preparation, and I had prepared patiently while she was busy lying. A week later, her company officially announced a leadership change, citing personal reasons. The press release was carefully worded, but the damage was done. People fill silence with assumptions, and assumptions travel faster than facts. She tried reaching out through mutual friends, through family, even through an old email address she thought I had forgotten. But every attempt met the same response: nothing, absence, the kind that forces people to sit alone with their own actions. I heard later that the man from the photo had distanced himself, completely blocked her. Denied involvement. Reputation preservation is an instinct, and she had become a liability. Nights passed and I slept better than I had in years. Not because revenge had made me happy, but because the constant weight of doubt was gone. I started rebuilding routines, morning runs, quiet dinners, conversations that did not require suspicion, and slowly my life began to feel like my own again. Yet I knew the story was not finished. Because consequences do not end when exposure happens, they echo, and she would eventually realize that losing her company was only the beginning, because in America, your image is your currency, and once it cracks, everything costs. More relationships, careers, second chances, and as I stood on my balcony one evening, watching the city lights stretch endlessly, I understood something that night had taught me. Betrayal feels personal, but revenge must be structural. It must outlive anger. And when done correctly, it does not destroy loudly, it erases quietly, leaving the other person to explain an absence they can never fully understand. Weeks passed, and the noise around her downfall settled into a low, constant hum that followed her everywhere. The kind people pretend not to hear but never forget. And during that time I stayed deliberately invisible. Because the most effective pressure is the one that does not announce itself. I focused on rebuilding my own structure, renegotiating contracts, redirecting investments, and stepping fully into roles I had once played quietly in the background, and it surprised many people how smoothly everything continued. Without her, meetings ran on time, decisions were clear, and trust stabilized, which only reinforced the unspoken conclusion that she had never been the foundation she claimed to be. Meanwhile, her life began shrinking in measurable ways. First, the apartment she moved into temporarily became permanent when no better option appeared. Then her social circle narrowed as invitations stopped arriving, not out of cruelty but caution, because association carries risk, and she had become risky. I heard updates not because I asked, but because silence creates curiosity. And people talk when they think you are detached. She tried to rebrand herself, posting carefully edited messages online about growth and resilience, but the comments were polite at best and skeptical underneath, because authenticity cannot be manufactured after exposure. It must be protected before. One afternoon, she finally succeeded in reaching me through a mutual legal intermediary, requesting a conversation to discuss closure, and the word itself almost made me laugh, because closure is a privilege usually granted to the person who caused harm, not the one who absorbed it. Still, I agreed to meet, not out of sympathy but strategy. We chose a neutral public space, a quiet cafe near downtown, and when I arrived, she was already there, sitting stiffly, hands folded, eyes alert, like someone expecting impact. She looked older, not physically aged but sharpened by stress. Confidence replaced by calculation. We exchanged brief greetings and sat, and for several minutes, she spoke uninterrupted, rehearsed sentences about mistakes, pressure, self-sabotage, claiming she lost herself somewhere along the way, and I listened without reaction. Because listening costs nothing and reveals everything. When she finished, she waited, eyes searching my face for something she could use. Anger, softness, regret, but I gave her none. I told her calmly that accountability does not require forgiveness, and forgiveness does not require access. I explained that the consequences she was experiencing were not punishment but alignment. Her public image now matched her private behavior, and that imbalance had been corrected. She asked if there was anything she could do to make things right, and I answered honestly that making things right would require undoing time. And since that was impossible, the only remaining option was acceptance. She pressed further, suggesting mediation, mutual statements, even financial concessions, and that was when I told her the part she had not yet understood. Nothing was negotiable anymore, because my objective had never been to extract compensation. It had been to restore agency, and that goal was already complete. She grew frustrated then, her voice rising slightly, asking why I continued to hold power over her future by refusing reconciliation. And I corrected her. I held no power over her future. I simply removed my protection, and the world responded accordingly. That realization hit her harder than anger ever could, because she finally understood that what she lost was not a husband but insulation. Someone who absorbed consequences on her behalf without her noticing. The meeting ended without drama. She left quickly, and I stayed behind finishing my coffee, watching strangers pass by who knew nothing about the collapse that had just been acknowledged quietly at a corner table. Days later, I learned she had applied for multiple positions within her industry and been declined without explanation. References had become cautious, non-committal, the kind that sounds professional but signals warning. She attempted a pivot into consulting, but clients hesitated. Background checks surfaced questions, and questions slow momentum. Each delay compounded the last, creating a pattern she could not escape, and through all of it, I remained silent. Because silence after truth feels heavier than accusation. I focused instead on expanding my own ventures, stepping into leadership publicly for the first time, and the reception was unexpectedly positive. People respect stability, especially when it appears after chaos. My nights were calm, my days structured. And for the first time in years, I was not managing someone else's narrative. I was living my own. Yet the final ripple came unexpectedly when I received notice that she had filed for divorce formally, citing irreconcilable differences. The irony was sharp but unsurprising. The paperwork was clean, uncontested, efficient, because there was nothing left to fight over. When the final documents were signed, I felt no triumph, only confirmation. Confirmation that preparation outlasts impulse, that betrayal feels sudden, but its consequences unfold slowly, deliberately, and often alone. And as I walked out of the courthouse that day into the open air, I realized the revenge had never been about destroying her life. It had been about refusing to let my own be collateral damage, and that decision had changed everything. The last time I heard her name spoken aloud was not in anger or gossip, but in a quiet professional setting. Months later, when an executive I barely knew mentioned her in passing as an example of potential gone wrong, and the tone was not cruel, it was dismissive, which I understood then was the true end of power, not being hated but being irrelevant. And as I drove home that evening through streets glowing with late summer light, I reflected on how cleanly everything had concluded. No shouting matches, no public accusations, no dramatic confrontations, just a series of decisions executed with patience. And patience, I learned, is what separates collapse from consequence. My life had not become perfect, but it had become honest. Mornings began without suspicion, evenings ended without tension, and the silence in my home was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. I redecorated slowly, not to erase the past, but to stop living inside it. New furniture, neutral colors, spaces that belonged to who I was becoming rather than who I had been trying to protect. Professionally, my role expanded beyond expectation. People trusted me because I was consistent, and consistency is rare in a world addicted to performance. Opportunities came, not through force, but through reputation. And reputation, unlike image, cannot be faked for long. Occasionally, I wondered where she was now, not out of longing but curiosity, the same curiosity one feels toward a closed chapter. And what I learned through indirect channels was enough. She had moved cities, then moved again, chasing resets that never quite landed. Each new beginning weighed down by unresolved endings, relationships short-lived, career attempts cautious and constrained. Not because the world was unfair, but because it remembered, and memory shapes access. One afternoon I received a message from an unknown number. No greeting, no explanation, just a sentence. I finally understand what I lost, and I stared at the screen for a long moment before deleting it without response. Because understanding without change is simply awareness. And awareness does not repair damage, it only names it. I chose not to reply because closure does not always require dialogue. Sometimes it requires distance. Time passed and the intensity of everything faded into perspective. What once felt like devastation now felt like instruction, teaching me the cost of ignoring intuition and the value of boundaries. I realized that love without respect becomes negotiation, and negotiation without honesty becomes manipulation. And I had lived too long inside that cycle without recognizing it. Now my standards were quieter but firmer. I listened more, tolerated less, and invested only where accountability flowed both ways. Years from now, someone might ask me what happened between us, and I would answer simply that we wanted different things from truth. She wanted flexibility. I wanted alignment, and alignment always wins eventually, not loudly, not quickly, but permanently. Standing at the edge of my balcony one final time, watching the city move beneath me, I understood the full shape of what had occurred. Revenge is often imagined as destruction, but real revenge is restoration, restoring self-respect, restoring control, restoring peace. It does not require cruelty, only clarity, and clarity is the one thing lies can never survive. My story did not end with her downfall. It began with my refusal to be diminished by it, and that refusal became the foundation for everything that followed. So if you stayed till the end, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment your thoughts below, because some stories are not just meant to be watched, they are meant to be remembered.